Nightwalker 2. Every day that passed in the castle was another moment in constant, never-ending fear. It now dwelled in the depths of the group's soul, their thoughts reminding them of a nightmare that can never wake up from. The nights were even worse than the days, as at least the presence of daylight meant that Vincent could rest. Everyone hated every moment of being confined to their death sentence. They were sinking into madness, feeling as if time itself was ticking inside their minds and slowly winding down. When the mechanism reached the part of their brain that causes the loss of all rational thought, they would truly know that they had snapped. The very next night, Karen sat up a meeting with the remaining survivors. Karen, Luke, Owen, Damien, and Spence were all sitting at a Knights of the Round Table. Leonard was at the meeting as well, but he was the only one standing. Karen was the first to speak up. It's not a myth any longer. We all know what we saw with our eyes. Vincent has transformed into a vampire. That's not the conclusion I arrived at, said Owen. He adjusted his reading glasses, pushing them up the bridge of his nose. Let's break this down, shall we? From what we know, humans cannot just simply turn into a vampire on their own. So where is the other vampire? Karen knew where Owen was going with this and spoke up. Clearly Vincent had to be bitten before he could transform into a vampire. Precisely my point, Owen answered back. Not only have I never seen this other bloodsucker, but there do not appear to be any bite marks left behind. If there were another vampire out there trying to transform Vincent, he would likely have fang indentations on either his wrist or neck. I have arrived at this theory since we came to this castle for the purpose of seeking our ghost. It might not be far-fetched to believe our Vincent is possessed by the ghost of a vampire. The others couldn't deny that Owen made a very good point. Owen was exactly right. He himself was in shock that he had arrived at the conclusion so quickly. He was so shocked that his pupils dilated profusely, and he could hear the loud thumping of his heart. Leonard looked hesitant and was shaking. What would everyone in this room do to Leonard if they knew what he had done? Leonard's eyes saw a blanket of darkness covering the room, even though it was well lit. His teeth chattered and he kept his arms crossed so they wouldn't shake visibly. In a raspy voice he said, "We don't have time for this nonsense. We should be trying to figure out a way to survive instead. What is the point of all these minor details? Vincent still appears to have all the attributes and powers of a vampire." Damien stood up out of his seat, slamming his fist on the table. I would like to hear what Owen has to say. He has been the only one that has seemed to make sense since we got here. One more day went by and then another. Time seemed to just be sneaking up behind them and taking their life away. It was like the pendulum of a clock, ticking down the moments until everyone's death sentence. Suddenly, the flames of the torches seemed to flicker, and then whether by wind or some other force, they were snuffed out. This left everyone in complete darkness. A loud scream was heard. It sounded like it was coming from Luke. The flames from the torches rose back up, filling the room with light once more. What the others saw horrified them. Luke was sitting on a medieval device known as the Chair of Torture. There were hundreds of spikes protruding out of the chair, and nearly all of them impaled him. Luke could not get up because his wrists were fastened down. The group looked on in horror and tried to pull him up out of the chair, but Owen told them not to. The spikes were sealing the wounds, and if they pulled him from the chair, Luke would bleed out and wouldn't stand a chance. To everyone's surprise, Leonard walked up to Luke. Before they had a chance to rationalize what he was doing, Leonard took his pistol, aimed it at Luke, and fired. The shot penetrated through Luke's skull as the back of his head deepened into the chair. The ruby textures were trickling down and escaping his body, as Luke was from this moment forever silent. Then the group looked to Leonard, dismayed and in utter confusion. Leonard explained that he simply just couldn't stand to watch Luke to suffer anymore. It was reasonable to believe this, as even Owen confirmed, that with the kind of wound Luke had, he would have only survived for one full day at best. Owen had his suspicions as to whether or not Vincent was involved in this murder. After giving Luke a proper burial, they all went back to the room. Leonard did not like that Owen was the one to study everything. Once everyone was seated, Owen spoke. I highly doubt Vincent would be so wasteful with his food. This doesn't look like it would be his work. Even if it was, there would be no reason for Vincent to hide him from us, as he greatly overpowers us all. Leonard shrugged his shoulders and yelled, "What are you getting at?" Owen stared at Leonard out of the corner of his eyes before shifting his gaze back. He dwindled his thumbs and let his hands rest over the table before speaking again. I have reason to believe that one of us is committing these murders. Even if you were to believe that, we don't have the power to just extinguish all the flames in the room like Vincent does. With this statement, Leonard was hoping to quiet Owen on his theory, but almost just as quickly, Owen retorted, "You might notice that I have been quiet up until recently, and that's because I like to study my surroundings and the people that are in them. I knew a week ago that this room has gas power, and that was likely installed by a previous owner. Whatever happened to them might be what is happening to Vincent now. I thought at first that it might be someone helping Vincent, but I would have to assume Vincent wouldn't be happy that his food supply has now been shortened. If Vincent finds out who is doing it, that person may very well be next to die. With every fiber of Leonard's being, he wished he could just silence Owen. Owen was right, though. He couldn't let Vincent know that he shortened his livestock. For now, Leonard just needed to maintain his composure, so he wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to stay focused. Damien walked down to the underground dungeon for something to eat. Leonard and Ivan, before sending the prisoners over to the island, had stored plenty of food in the dungeon. Unlike the castle, above the dungeon it was dark and cold. It had lit torches in a few areas, but was still mostly eclipsed in darkness. Leonard and Ivan used to bring the food up so the arrivals wouldn't have to see the underground or prison cells in the dungeon. And in those cells were skeletal remains. One of the corpses still had a hand wrapped around the bars, as if he was trying to cling to life. Damien took a few steps back and bumped into something. He turned around and found out that it wasn't just something, but someone. Vincent stood before him. Damien shouted, and even pleaded for his life. "You will make a fine meal, as you are seasoned in torment and fear." And all this time, it looked as if Vincent had grown. He now towered at nearly 10 feet tall. Damien even tried his best to put up a fight, swinging a clutched fist. Vincent caught it and gripped down, causing Damien's knuckle to break in half. He yelled out in pain as Vincent's grin widened, and he prepared to wound his prey. "First, I think I will eat your eyes. Through the lenses, I can see the windows of your soul." "I thought vampires fed on blood, not flesh," Damien managed to shout out, the pain becoming more excruciating by the second. At that moment, Vincent's form began to shift, his back splitting apart so that wings could form and take shape. Claws cut through his fingers, and his teeth emerged as jagged razors. He was turning into a monstrous beast. He looked to Damien once more and answered, "You forgot that I'm not Vincent, and he is not a vampire. This body needs more than blood to sustain itself." Just then, the rest of the group made it to the dungeon in time to see the vampire and the petrified Damien. Karen walked up slowly after seeing the enormous stature of Vincent. He appeared to be more creature than human. In a low tone, she said, "Vincent, just what is it you want?" To this, the beast retorted, "I am Hayden, not Vincent. And what I want I already have, my prey. It's a game of hunt, and you lost." Karen thought for a moment and contemplated. Hayden's claws wrapped around Damien's neck and began to slice into his skin. He lifted Damien with one arm, suspending his feet in the air as he started to hold on for dear life. So much pain ensued that Damien gritted his teeth hard enough to cause them to crack. Karen would then speak once more. "But there was no challenge. You didn't have to do any hunting. We were right here for you from the start. You were granted absolute victory with no effort to show for it." This got Hayden's attention. The deformed beast loosened its hold on Damien, and he fell to the floor. Slowly its head turned to look at Karen, a stare worse than looking into the hellfire of the underworld. Karen spoke up again. "I'm not saying you should let us go, but I would think you would want to give us a fighting chance, even if it was a small one. It's not as satisfying when you haven't earned your meal, is it?" In truth, Hayden wanted to just go ahead and rip out everyone's throat, but that would spoil his food. He didn't give a nod or any acknowledgement to Karen's question. He just paused and waited for what she had to say next. Now that Karen got his attention, she continued, "I am willing to bet that when you take over Vincent, he has no recollection of what's going on. I bet when you take possession, he goes through blackouts. I ask that every other day you let us talk to the real Vincent." "What purpose would that serve?" inquired Hayden. Karen thought for a few moments before responding back. "If we can convince Vincent that he is possessed by a vampire, then you have to let us go back to our homes and back to our lives." "Vincent already thinks he's possessed by a vampire," Leonard shouted out in a brief moment of panic. "No, he thinks he is a vampire, and there's a difference," corrected Owen. "Know this. I will entertain you for now, but I don't play this trivial game because I have to. This will not save any of you. I will spare your lives for now, but you only delay the inevitable. You will have 3 tries in the span of 1 week to convince the real Vincent. You will be allowed to speak to him every other day. Does that sound like sufficient rules to your game? Since you created this meaningless challenge as a way to escape your pathetic little lives, the expense of your comrades will be on your head, Karen. When this is over, you will die the slowest and most painful way you can imagine. With that said, is there anything else you would like me to know before I make my departure for the night?" Karen felt the terror rise up in her body, but still she maintained composure. She finally added, "You're not the only one involved in these killings. There is someone with us that is doing it for you. In that turn, that is shortening your supply of food. I just thought you would want to know." To this, Hayden blinked twice, once vertically and once horizontally. He gazed in Leonard's direction in a state of confusion and wonderment. There is always a traitor among men, which is why vampires like to work alone. Death to this one will not come swift, but through a long process of events that will result in being skinned alive. I don't want them to die off too quickly, so I will create seams in the body and then slowly connect all the lines. They will get to witness me eating their brains before they die. Leonard tried his best to hold in his fear. He couldn't stop the nervous shaking, and, to make matters worse, he couldn't stop feeling paranoid that others might know he is behind this. Karen agreed to Hayden's terms. He even appeared to look as if he was about to walk away, but his hands and feet slowly formed into talons. They lunged out and gripped onto Damien's arm. Hayden started to pull as Damien's arm began to twist. The crushing of bones could be heard just before Damien's arm ripped from his body. As it separated, the red rivers flowed out and gushed everywhere. "I thought you said you would spare us for now," Karen shouted at Hayden at the top of her lungs. "You are allowed to live for now, but I never said you would be comfortable." To this, Hayden's jawline dislocated, and fangs of pointy spheres formed within. His mouth opened, and rows of teeth clamped down and tore into the arm. In 3 chomps, the arm was no more. The bones, the flesh could be heard ripping apart. He looked to Damien. He appeared to look as if he was going into shock. Flames came out of Hayden's mouth as he sealed up the wound from Damien's severed arm. The group came over and tried to help Damien with his horrific and agonizing pain. The vampire just stared at Karen with a glare, as if to say, "How dare she think herself equal to me?" He left them alone for the rest of the night. The pain inflicted by Damien, both physically and mentally, was not even close to subsiding. He was at a point where he had stopped talking many hours ago. Once in a while, when he was not staring into the abyss of the night, he would say, "We are going to all die, aren't we?" Damien knew that even if he lived, he would never be the same again. They talked for so long that the sun rose up behind all the darkness and shined its light onto the world. Karen took in a deep breath. She had a notebook and a pen with her to write things down. Right now is the best time to talk about this, while it is still daylight. The more we know, the better the chances are of escaping. No disrespect, Leonard, but there is no longer any need to listen to your orders. We listened because we thought we were going to serve less of a prison time. Most of us will die before the chartered boat gets here, said Damien. Let's get back on topic. Do you know anything about this, Leonard? You do have all of our files, after all, said Luke. Leonard felt as if he was backed into a corner. He paused for a moment. If he tried to cover it up with a lie, it would show a sign of guilt and his intentions if they found out. He closed his eyes and ran his hands through his hair before responding. Ivan and I discovered that Vincent has had a history of being possessed. We uncovered a letter from his mother that talked about ending his life if it came down to it. If you know that much, and you have all our files, it is reasonable to assume you could be hiding something else we don't know about, Owen pointed out. The tension in the room was more than Leonard could bear. Did they know? No, of course not. They would have no way of knowing about the discussion he had with Vincent. It made Leonard frantic that Owen kept putting the pressure on him. From Leonard's perspective, Owen should be eliminated next. He was far too smart to live, and he could ruin everything. I'm sorry to act so callous, but I couldn't care less about how any of you feel about me. I'm here for the same reason right now. We all want to get out of this together. When you lash out like that, it only makes you all the more suspect, said Owen. From now on, we are going to keep a good eye on you. Now that I think about it, where were you when we tried to escape from the castle and that zombie horde rose from the ground? With a light sigh, Karen spoke again. This is not going to get us anywhere. What we need to focus on is what we know about vampires. We know all the obvious things, like how they need to be invited in before coming into someone's home, stakes to the heart, holy water, having to count, sunlight, salt, fire, etc. But I can't think of anything that can help us convince Vincent he is possessed. Damien shouted, It's daylight now. Why don't we just kill him while he's sleeping? That would prove to be futile in this case. The reason being, if Vincent is possessed and we killed him, all that would happen is the spirit would just transfer to a new body. This process would keep repeating itself until we all meet our demise. Leonard wished he could strike down Owen right now. How dare he try to challenge him in a battle of wits? He would have to wait until night casted its shadow. Otherwise, if he tried to kill anyone during the day, they would know for sure that Vincent was not working alone. Or could he? Even though Vincent was in a deep slumber to escape the burning sun, the minions that surround the castle were not affected by the light. Perhaps he could use some of the undead to his advantage. As he had dark and vivid thoughts of his own, the other people in the group continued on with trying to come up with a solution to convince Vincent that he was possessed. Hayden would surely know for sure the difference if Vincent was to just make a false claim and said he believed the group about his possession just to spare everyone's life, including his own. The problem with this idea is Hayden would probably know the difference between genuine sincerity and a lie. Their minds and hearts were one. The sun began to hide and the darkness started to show itself. They knew they would get to see Vincent again, but had nothing to ask him. There was nothing they could think of to convince him that he was captured and his soul was imprisoned and taken over by another. Then it happened. During the night, the dark thoughts rose up, the ones that a person normally tries so hard to keep at the inner depths of their mind, the contemplation of suicidal tendencies. The pendulum wound down to the rhythm of a heartbeat. With Damien's only arm, his hand took a knife and slid it across his temples. Then it passed over to the center of his skull. He was wondering if he should just end it now. Each passing moment went on for another eternity. The tip of the blade felt as if it was about to pierce his skin. The clock ticked just before a loud chime, and then all the torches in the room went out.